All right, I'm watching the number of attendees rapidly climb, which is incredibly exciting, but I think we should go ahead and start. So welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. My name is Sonia Anderson and I lead INE's work on data and evidence. And INE is thrilled to come together with the Education Cannot Wait Fund, the Geneva Global Hub for EIE, Porticus and Oxford Measured to support the launch of ECW's new Holistic Learning Outcome Measurement Handbook for EIEPC contexts. I'm just going to share a couple logistic notes and then hand over to our presenters. We have about an hour and 15 minutes prepped for you of presentation and then some active discussion and Q&A. Because this is a webinar format, you are muted. But we really encourage you to engage with the presentations and interact in the chat, as well as via the Q&A function. So any questions you have, please do post them in the Q&A function or in the chat if that's your preference. And if you do have a question for a specific presenter, we encourage you to direct your question accordingly. Our presenters will do their best to answer questions as they go, but we will retain time at the end of the webinar also to jump into Q&A. So again, thank you so much for being with us. The webinar is being recorded. If for some reason you have to drop off or if you have a colleague who couldn't make it, we will share all of the materials, the presentations and the recording on the INE website after the webinar. And with that, I think I will hand it over to Moritz Spulder, who is ECW's monitoring manager. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Sonia, and dear colleagues, welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are, and welcome to this launch event. It's my sincere pleasure to welcome you for the launch of this Holistic Learning Outcome Measurement Handbook for education in emergencies and affected crisis settings. As Sonia said, I'm Moritz Spulder and I'm the monitoring manager here at Education Cannot Wait. And I had the pleasure overseeing and guiding the development of this handbook. It's been a long journey for us since we first started working on this handbook about 4 years ago. Since that time, it has been applied, it has been tested and used in 6 protected crisis settings and countries. And based on those experiences, we've tried to refine and update it. And today, we're happy to launch it as a global public good with all of you. And the handbook builds on measurements carried out in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh, parts of Burkina Faso, the DRC, Ethiopia, Iraq, and the early childhood education sector in Uganda. And these sample-based assessments focus particularly on crisis-affected populations, be it the refugees in Bangladesh or Uganda, or conflict and violence-affected learners in the DRC or Burkina. So the measurements are not nationally representative or census-based assessments, but targeted sample-based. So what does this handbook offer? The handbook aims to give a structured way to design and carry out a holistic learning outcome measurement. It provides technical guidance, it applies a capacity development approach, and promotes research uptake, all to strengthen the education assessment system in emergencies and crisis settings. So it's meant to guide you as EIEPC practitioners and organizations in running more purposeful assessments. And ideally not alone, but in combination with others through your existing institutional setups in country. So it's not a handbook for ECW, it's not a handbook for ECW grantees only. It goes beyond that, and it's for all sector actors. So the handbook is grounded in the evidence from ECW's 2021 to 2024 Holistic Learning Outcome Measurement Program. And the program was carried out by our multi-year resilience programs in the 6 countries I just mentioned. And we didn't do this alone. We did this together with 6 national assessment partners who played a key role in validating tools, collecting data, and aggregating findings. These assessment partners were diverse. Sometimes they were government departments in education, or they were data-driven NGOs, or they were consultancy firms who were active in the sector. These assessment partners, as well as the multi-year resilience program grantees, were all supported by Cambridge Education and Oxford Measured, who provided strong technical measurement assistance to all of them. So I would also like to sincerely thank them all, especially our grantees and the partners in the countries, for their commitment and dedication that all led to this global public good. Now, measuring holistic learning, which in ECW's concept is a combination of literacy, numeracy, and relevant social-emotional learning domains, is not as easy in EIEPC settings. There are so many different educational contexts. The types of conflict and therefore education provision differs substantially. Multiple types of education providers are active. Kids have different starting levels and curriculum exposure. There is language diversity, and of course, there are security risks in actually collecting certain data. Because of all this, we thought that a single standardized blueprint or tool for all measurements in EIEPC wasn't realistic. And not was it desirable for us as ECW or for our grantees in country. What we thought was more useful was this framework and a step-by-step guide that supports you. A framework that helps you make key decisions along the way on how to design and implement a holistic learning assessment that fits your expectations and your needs. Expectations and needs that exist all across multiple partners, exist beyond individual specific projects, and with better quality data that informs eventually sectoral and program planning. And that's exactly what this handbook is about. Of course, there were challenges along the way in every project and intervention. Setting shared sectoral expectations and ambitions within, obviously, the limited resources we had available. How do we actually include children that are in non-formal education programs and do not follow the national system? How to disaggregate data by population status so individualized kids can be supported in a better way? Or how to set up a proper sampling framework without actually having complete and accurate existing population data. And I think despite all of this, we made it happen. And I think this is largely due to a couple of factors. I think, first of all, a strong and continued flexible technical support throughout the entire process from A to Z. There was consistent funding obviously available, both from a global level, but also from a country level and the programs that we funded there. And I think solid, equal partnerships were set up through the existing coordination mechanisms. So we collectively decided on the purposes of each of these individual studies and expectations of the work that we had. So I'm somehow proud to say that all these studies were successfully completed. Reports are available. Handover packages are shared with the sector, with the partners. Sometimes followed up with dissemination and learning events. And these are all available, I think, upon request. Now, just for today's agenda, I'll soon hand over to Rachel Outhred from Oxford Measured, who will kick us off with a presentation of the purpose and content of the handbook. She is also the lead author of this handbook. Then Genta Gyaji from Save the Children in Iraq will share her thoughts on the usefulness of the work that we did together in Iraq. Duerke Luiten from the Portuguese Foundation, who partially funded this initiative, will also share her insights and thoughts. And from there, we are collecting your questions through the function that Sonia explained. And we will respond to some of these questions now, and other questions that we cannot respond now to, we will get back to you after this session. That's it from my side. Thank you very much for joining the session, and I'll hand over from here to Rachel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Moritz, and thank you all for joining this webinar today. I'm Rachel Althred, and it's a pleasure to be able to speak through some of the content of this handbook to you all on this webinar. This handbook was developed by the Global Technical Partner as part of ECW's Holistic Learning Outcomes Measurement Program, as Moritz just outlined. The program was implemented under ECW's oversight and management and implemented by a global technical partner, also with 6 grantees, often including their implementing partners, and 6 national assessment partners across these 6 countries. Grantees included Save the Children and UNICEF, and national assessment partners included national NGOs, local consultancies, and governments themselves. And the aims of the handbook are to increase the availability of quality holistic learning outcomes data, improve the design and execution of holistic learning outcomes measurement in education and emergency contexts, and support system strengthening. And it's an important note here that the system to be strengthened really depends on the typology of the emergency. It is the set of actors that are in place to manage, coordinate, or lead the humanitarian response. So in some settings that might include working with government, and in other settings it may not. So system strengthening in these humanitarian settings have a slightly different framing to the traditional development conceptualization of system strengthening. In terms of the process of developing the handbook, we initially developed this handbook, as Moritz outlined, at the beginning of this program 4 years ago. And then we have essentially shared it with stakeholders and also adapted based on our experiences across these 6 contexts. So essentially we can say that it's been piloted in 6 countries. And another important thing to note is that the purpose of this study wasn't to analyse and compare learning outcomes across countries. The work is designed to provide insights into current learning outcome levels and the factors that determine that learning, so that programs within each country can adjust and be improved. The development and implementation of holistic learning outcomes in crisis-affected settings are fraught with challenges, and Moritz has gone over some of those. Some of those are foreseen and others are not always foreseen. We outline some of these challenges in the handbook. To note a few, as Moritz mentioned, the absence of a blueprint or a framework on how to do holistic learning outcome measurements in education and emergency settings. And by a framework or a blueprint, we don't mean this is how you do it exactly, apply it across different settings, because these settings are too diverse for that type of approach to work. What we mean is a blueprint for how you navigate common challenges and how to help navigating those challenges to help shape the design and execution within the specifics of an education and emergency setting. Another one of the challenges that we experienced was often unrealistic planning and budgeting for learning assessments. So, for example, not necessarily in this project, but in the work that we do on learning measurements, we often see planning for a whole learning assessment from start to finish to be undertaken in 1 month. And this often takes place because partners don't understand the multiple steps that need to be taken. So this handbook lays those steps out and assists with work planning. Also with budgeting, it's often not a case of not having budget, but it's more often a case of difficulty knowing how to prioritize the most important things within the resources that are available. So this handbook helps guide some of those decisions. And of course, there are technical challenges that are not unique to the education and emergency setting. And we still include those and include mitigating factors and those technical challenges that are unique to education and emergency settings. We won't go through today what those mitigating strategies are. That's why we put them in the handbook, and you can go and have a look. In terms of the structure of the handbook, it's made up of 3 sections. The first section is starting the design process. So how do you actually build consensus with the partners that you have about what it is that you're doing and why you're doing it and how it fits with what's already happening. The second is the design decisions, a step-by-step process and the key decisions that need to be made to design the actual assessment study before moving into the specifics, which is section 3, of the more technical design and development of the assessment itself. So to take you through some of that content in a little bit more detail, in section 1, we provide information on how to build consensus with partners. And building consensus is about agreeing on what the purpose of this activity is and integrating the study within a theory of change so that all partners are on the same page concerning why we're doing this and how it's going to result in more children learning more. Mapping available information on learning outcomes within the context so that all partners have a built consensus on what we already know about learning outcomes. Agreeing the budget availability and what can meaningfully be achieved within the available budget and some of the prioritization decisions that might need to be made. And ensuring that the study is integrated into the program, integrated into the work that partners are already doing, and that it reflects the questions that they already have about learning outcomes in the setting. We also outline starting the design process. So how do you identify the technical support that's needed in order to make sure that the assessment is of sufficient quality? How do you select a national or local assessment partner? And a step-by-step process to design the study. And the step-by-step process is the second section of the handbook. But also just to outline what I think was really clear from the introduction from Moritz is that we propose a partnership approach to be able to measure holistic learning outcomes in education and emergency settings. And we propose this approach so that you can leverage the different skills, experiences, and relationships that different partners can bring to the process. So a global technical partner who can bring technical skills. And to be really clear on the terminology, we don't mean global in terms of any particular location. Perhaps the location is on the globe, but rather that they have a set of knowledge and skills that's globally recognized in the learning measurement space. It could be an organization, but it could equally be an individual depending on the approach taken. A coordinating partner who brings deep knowledge, experience, and relationships in the setting. And in the work that we did, that was the MERP grantee, but we've used these more generic names for different partners so that you can apply those to the programming and the setting that you're doing your work in. And finally, assessment partners who bring contextual understanding, who make sure that the assessment itself is contextually relevant and adapted to the realities of the setting and the lived experiences of the children in that setting, but also bring local know-how about how to actually do an assessment in often quite complex contexts. Section 2 guides partners through the design decisions. We identify 9 key design decisions that need to be made before actually implementing a learning assessment. So we take readers through what to consider when making each decision. And we provide case studies and examples from real-world education and emergency contexts. And to be clear, these are the design decisions about the study itself and not the nuances and the specifics of an assessment tool or assessment items. I won't go into detail on each of these 9 steps and decisions. But perhaps to pick up a few key points. The first key point that you'll see here is that number 1 does not have which tools will we use next to it. And this is a common error that's made in measurement studies. The first question that we need to ask is what is the information that you need to know? What is it that you need to know that you don't currently know that will help your programming? And some parts of this decision trajectory are part of every assessment, but other parts are more specific to the education and emergency context. So for example, will it be school or community based? Within education and emergency settings, the inclusion of non-formal programming makes these types of assessments more holistic than traditional school-based assessment programs. So when we say a holistic learning outcome measurement program, that isn't just about the domains that are being selected, but also holistic in terms of who is included. Other steps that are particularly relevant to the education and emergency settings includes this question of age or grade, and actually considerations in general around age and grade. Informal schooling programs often have much larger age ranges that need to be thought through. And also decisions need to be made about which formal schooling level will be seen as equivalent to which informal level in some situations when you decide which age or grade you decide to target. For step 8, we include collecting contextual data so that later we can look at how these different factors interact with learning outcomes to inform programming. And the last point is that on step 9, it's our experience that evidence use and uptake needs to be explicitly thought through and planned for from the very beginning. It needs to be assigned budget, and it needs to be, its implementation needs to be monitored. Is often the first thing to fall off the table. Everyone finishes an assessment and is great and happy that we have data, but it's often quickly forgotten or not applied in places where it could be applied to have a bigger impact without doing that explicit planning. The third and last section is on the specific design of the assessment itself and the execution. So we identify the steps that the assessment partner will undertake. And in the setup that we have proposed in the partnership approach, that would include support from a global technical partner. We provide the key considerations to guide each decision along the path. So you'll see that this is a lot more specific to the actual development of the assessment itself, as opposed to the big questions of what do we need to know, how are we going to design the assessment, who are we going to disseminate it to, etc. Again, we're not going to go into the details here, that's all in the handbook. But in this section of the handbook, it is really aimed at the national assessment partner, and it goes into more details on the technical process. So the third section is a handbook for the assessment partners on the technical processes involved. In our experience, segmenting these two different decisions that need to be made is really helpful. So for example, sometimes actors who can add the most value on those big strategic questions, like what is it that we need to know? When do we need to know it? What's our decision-making window? Which grades do we need to target? Who are the actors who need to see the results of this assessment? Sometimes those actors who can add great value there can get caught up in technical areas of the assessment, like which items will we use? So segmenting these out provides a much clearer idea around roles and responsibilities. As you can see, we outlined that it's really important to ensure success that planning for all of these steps is done before the actual work begins. So work planning and having these 13 steps laid out with the information around each should be able to help partners to think through how long of each of these steps should take, what's the likely level of effort, and plan it so it's realistic and its implementation can be monitored from a work planning perspective. And finally, in the annex, we provide templates that we developed and we found helpful across the 6 countries. So we provide a template of the population sample data. So what is the population that we're going to draw a sample from? Often data that's available isn't in the specific format that makes that helpful for sampling. So we provide a template that can be used and guide partners. We have a go-to guide on the key concepts of validity, reliability, and fairness for assessment. We have a framework for answering the design decisions, the 9 design decisions, but also to document the rationale. Why were those decisions made? So that later in the process, if partners decide to revisit any of those decisions, there's a rationale clearly documented where we can go back and say, what were we thinking when we made that decision? And does that still hold? Do we want to move away from that decision or not? We include a dissemination and uptake tracker to support partners to be able to consider upfront what it is, how it is they want to disseminate, to who, in what format, and then to monitor that dissemination and to monitor the outcomes of the dissemination by monitoring what the uptake has been like. And finally, an assessment partner budget template to support procurement and ensure that there's an easy process for whoever is undertaking the procurement to compare across different financial proposals. Finally, restating what Moritz outlined in the beginning, we found through this process that when we work together, grantees, national assessment partners, in some cases, implementing partners, and the global technical partner were collectively successful in our ambition to design and deliver a holistic learning outcome assessment. And we found that this demonstrates that where there is technical support, where there is funding and incentives, in this case from a donor, in this case ECW, and where we are all leveraging the strengths of each partner within the partnership, and particularly the existing knowledge, relationships, expertise, and skills of the partners within the education and emergency setting, that we overcome those systematic barriers that we identified through this process. And of all of the challenges that we encountered, we found that they were predominantly not insurmountable. So thank you very much for listening and joining us for the content of the handbook. I'm now going to hand over to my colleague Genta. Genta is the MERP director at Save the Children in Iraq. We had the pleasure of working with Genta and her team on designing and executing a holistic learning outcomes measurement program in Iraq. And so I'm now going to hand over to her to speak more about that process and that experience from a grantee perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rachel. Hello, everyone. I will be sharing a part of the journey and the impact of the Holistic Learning Outcome Measurement Handbook in Iraq. As mentioned by the colleagues, Iraq was one of the countries to pilot the handbook. It was a process done with the involvement of both Ministries of Education, the Federal Iraq and the Kurdistan region. We have involved 13 implementing partners, 7 international and 6 local, and many other stakeholders who sit in the MERP steering committee or contribute to other partnership levels. In addition to setting the baseline for the MYRP, the assessment and identified gaps and challenges that children face in schools, which contribute to low learning outcomes and lead to school dropouts. In the local level, throughout the process, we aim to build ownership by engaging school personnel, community members, and local partners. We worked directly with 37 schools across 8 governorates, targeting refugees, IDPs, returnees, and host community. At the national level, the collaboration with both Ministries of Education was essential. Their proactive engagement made it possible to translate findings into concrete actions, aligning them with national priorities and inform both advocacy and planning. Actually, since the war or after war, we have been raising in Iraq the issue of low learning outcomes in schools, but only when we had provided evidence to the holistic learning outcome measurements, this matter got the right attention and then got also the level of engagement that was required. Clearly, the findings don't show a pleasant situation. It was not easy to admit them by all stakeholders. But the credibility of this process was strengthening by having Cambridge Education and Oxford Measure Education as technical global leads. Their technical expertise ensured the assessment was reliable, trustworthy, and it built confidence across all partners. For the first time, we have done a benchmarking exercise. It was collaboratively with both Ministries of Education and all partners. Together, we defined the expected learning level for grade 4 students, and that should be in the start of the academic year. This made the process not only innovative, but also highly engaging. Everyone involved at that stage could clearly understand and interpret the findings from the technical perspective. Another unique aspect was the inclusion of social and emotional learning as one of the assessment domains. It was new for many of us, but it brought attention to importance of empathy and self-concept during the learning journey. It raised awareness for all of us that learning is not just about literacy and numeracy, but about the holistic development of children. The findings did provide both Ministries of Education with clear evidence on the urgent need to improve learning outcomes in literacy, numeracy, and social emotional learning. For example, in refugee community, 40% of children on the targeted schools are under the expected level in literacy, which was defined by the benchmarking exercise as I mentioned above. As an action in the program level in these schools where we are hosting refugee children, we are now providing remedial education to help children catch up academically, improve language skills, and build resilience. In terms of system strengthening and contributing to it and advocacy, following the assessment, the findings were shared throughout roundtables, discussions, and outreach events, particularly in Kurdistan region where Syrian refugees are hosted. These platforms helped raise awareness and push discussions around the key challenges. As a result, both ministries committed to prioritize teachers' training, addressing the overcrowded classrooms, and strengthening the education system. For us, as humanitarian and development actors implementing MURP and not limited to MURP, the measurement of the learning outcomes has impacted the way how we work. It gives us evidence to design smarter and more focused interventions. Every new education intervention under MURP, but not limited to MURP, is now rooted in these findings. We go back and refer to the findings to build our education interventions. In addition, we are using this data to mobilize resources. Currently, through Save the Children, a matched intervention proposal is submitted to educate a child under education above all. Also, in collaboration with all partners, we are actively engaging donors, exploring partnerships, pursuing private sector in order to expand the support for education in Iraq and Kurdistan region. To close, the holistic learning outcomes measurements is more than an assessment. For us, it was a turning point. It gave us clear evidence and a real situation on the targeted schools and gave us direction on what to prioritize. And most importantly, it brought all of us together, government, partners, communities, to serve better to every child in Iraq. I'm very happy to answer any question you might have. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Genta, for that reflection on the work that you did in Iraq. I think I'll hand over to Durga for her reflections from Porticus.
Thank you very much, Maurits. I would like to start by congratulating Education Cannot Wait, partners, Oxford Measured, Cambridge Education, for the excellent collaboration that has led to this handbook. I think a true global public good. At Porticus, we work to create a sustainable future where justice and human dignity flourishes. We want to ensure that more children, especially those in extreme adversity, receive inclusive, high-quality education that's helping them to reach their full potential. Because when education meets the holistic needs of all learners, including their social and emotional well-being, it can help children and their communities to thrive. Social emotional learning is important for all children, but especially important for children affected by crisis and displacement, because it supports their psychosocial recovery and well-being. At Porticus, we work to shift education systems to support children in adversity through incorporating social emotional learning. However, as we have heard today, there's limited data on the learning outcomes of children in crisis settings, especially around social emotional learning. And unfortunately, education actors tend to only treasure what they can measure. But measurement of SEL is more than developing or using valid and reliable measurement tools. It also requires strengthening the learning measurement system around it by engaging with diverse local stakeholders, capacity strengthening, and providing tailored support based on the local context. And this is exactly what this collaboration set out to do. This handbook supports practitioners to design and implement locally relevant holistic learning outcome measurements based on contextually relevant SEL constructs, not by proposing a one-size-fits-all, but by guiding partners step by step in designing context-appropriate learning assessment. We hope that this handbook for the whole sector will not only increase the availability of data, but will also help design and improve quality education interventions that meet the learning needs of children affected by crisis, academically and non-academically. Such as in Bangladesh, where holistic learning outcome measurement can help to identify and address the specific needs of Rohingya children, ensuring education initiatives are trauma-informed and culturally relevant. Before I end, I really would like to thank ECW and partners again for the great collaboration that has led to the development of this handbook. The collaboration started in 2019, driven by a shared belief that all children, especially those affected by crisis, deserve a holistic education beyond literacy and numeracy. Through ongoing dialogue and funding, we have been able to put a spotlight on holistic learning, a priority which was already held by ECW. And as a result, holistic learning also became a core pillar of ECW's strategic plan. Moreover, we have been able to leverage the broader ECW portfolio as measurement of holistic learning became mandatory across multi-year resilience plans. I think it's an excellent example of how philanthropic funders, global pooled funds, and implementing partners can come together to help ensure that all children receive inclusive, high-quality education that enables them to reach their full potential. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Durga, from your perspective, or from your reflections from Porticus' side. I'm happy to say that we're quite on time, which means that we have quite some time to go a bit more deeper into some of the questions that you have all asked. Please continue doing so in the Q&A, and we cannot respond to all of them, but we will respond to all of them after this session. And I'd like to highlight a few of these questions and hand over to some of our presenters to answer them. I think the first question is very practical. I'll try to respond to it myself first, and then I'd love to hear also from Genta how that was done in Iraq as a practical example. But the question is from Imran, who is asking, who do you think is responsible for making the 9 decisions about the design of the measurement, right? And I think, Imran, from within this program and within these 6 countries, what we did is we worked through the established coordination mechanisms. So we looked at what's the sector doing, what's the education working group doing, bring these organizations together, see what information is already available on the existing learning levels, ask the question in the first step of the design decisions on what would you like to use this information for, and then collectively decide on the purpose of the assessment. So we try to avoid an individual organization or an individual MERP grantee to unilaterally make a decision. Of course, you can use the handbook in that way if you want to do an assessment or a measurement from your own project or your own program or a set of programs that you run. But our ambition is to do it collectively and to make it as big as possible. And I think Genta from Iraq already talked about that there was Save the Children and they had 11, 13 implementing partners. That's what we did also in Bangladesh. I remember we were in the room with, I think, 10, 15 partners, including the big INGOs, all the UN agencies, local organizations, and collectively you try to figure out what to use this for. Genta, do you want to share a little bit who made the decisions in Iraq?
It was collectively done, as you, Maurits, are saying, but also for us, it was very important to have government bodies involved in the process in Iraq, because we are post-crisis, and building that ownership and take leadership from the government is very important. So for us, it was both Ministries of Education, Kurdistan Ministry of Education, Federal Iraq Ministry of Education, taking decision respectively in consultation with every or all the partners around the table. It was not every decision easy. For example, in the benchmarking exercise, we had so many debates when we set the level of where a 4th grader in the beginning of the academic year should sit. But all together with the right rationale and the right leadership, which in our case, we had a great help from the global partners, but also from our side to facilitate, which made it for us very much collaborative and easier to reach a conclusion. The process was not easy, but the conclusion was reached. Over.
All right. Thanks, Genta. Rachel, second question for you from Catherine Don, and she's asking, is it necessary that we should always look for a global partner for having the expertise? She's stating that, is it not better to emphasize capacity development of such expertise in the emergency context or specific situation? Could you share your reflections on that question?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a really great question. So I think that those two things are connected. I think that it is absolutely necessary to build the capacity of expertise within the emergency context. And that's why we took this 2-partnership approach on the technical side, that our national assessment partner or local assessment partner did bring that local knowledge, local expertise. But as we all know, learning measurement can be a very complex technical task. So that's why we also thought it was important to have a global technical partner. Again, to be really clear, that global technical partner could be in the same setting if they had those globally recognized measurement skills. And what we did, I didn't include this detail in the presentation today, but you'll see it in the handbook and you'll see some of the resources in the handbook as well, is that the global technical partner had a conversation, and there's a framework for managing the conversation with national assessment partners around where they see their strengths and where they would like support during all of the steps that need to be taken, those 13 steps that you'll remember. And therefore, there's a dialogue between those two partners about where do you feel comfortable, just getting on with things, and where would you like additional support. So it's through using a partnership approach that we're both leveraging the skills of a technical partner, but also engaging in capacity building and development for those skills in the setting itself.
Great. Thank you very much, Rachel. We have another question here from Julia Jonah. She is asking, have governments had an interest in these holistic measurement tools? Do they see value in these holistic tools versus kind of standalone literacy, numeracy, or cell measurements? And have any countries adopted these assessments for national use? I can quickly respond to this question, and then maybe Rachel, you can also come in. And when I read this question, I think the first thing that came to my mind was the process that we did in Uganda, whereby we basically worked in the early childhood education sector, particularly only for the refugee hosted districts. And we had the same process whereby we invited all the MERP partners and the implementing partners, but we also invited everyone from the UNICEF side and the Play Matters Consortium and all the NGOs and local organizations that were there. I think we had like 13 organizations, as well as ministerial representation. And one of the conclusions in the design decisions on the purpose of the assessment was eventually to say, we can, and Rachel, you can come in here, but we eventually landed on the purpose to do a school readiness assessment from the last grade or the last class in the early childhood education, so what they call the top class before they move into primary, and look at it holistically. So not make a statement, the kid is on this item or on this domain, literacy is here, on reading he's there, on his concentration levels he's here, but we combined literacy, numeracy aspects with social emotional learning, with executive functioning skills, and combine that all into an assessment on the extent to which that child was ready to transit into primary education or not. So I think that's an example whereby through participatory approaches, the government also, and including the government in that, and I think similar processes or examples can be given from particularly Iraq and Burkina Faso, about the thinking about holistic learning and what it means to them. Rachel, any reflections from your side on that question?
Yeah, thank you, Moritz. Again, a great question. I think that the connections between this program and government is not necessarily just only on that issue of our government's interested in cell. I think that maybe Genta might be able to give us more insight from her experiences there. But I think, and I think this connects with one of the other questions that's been asked, is that we found where possible, we tried to connect what government was doing with what this program was doing. So in some places that isn't possible, for example, in Cox's Bazar, but where it was possible, we explored as much as possible to make those connections. So for example, in Burkina Faso, the government was the national assessment partner, and their role was about extending out the learning assessments that are already done nationally, but exclude these emergency contexts, to extend out to include the emergency context. And through working with partners on this program, that increased their interest in cell. They became very interested in what we're trying to measure and how to do that. And actually the links, perhaps sometimes the implicit rather than explicit links with the curriculum that they have. Yes, also the link with what Moritz was explaining on school readiness in Uganda, there's definitely been interest from the government there in kind of using this as a pilot and expanding it out to the national level. So yes, definitely interest in CEL. I think probably my reflection would be that there's still that very strong focus on CEL in its role to facilitate academic outcomes. So I think there's still work for us to do there, that it's a useful goal in and of itself, not to the exclusion of academic outcomes, but with academic outcomes, the dual pursuit. But I think it's quite diverse across countries.
Great. Okay, thank you. We have another set of questions, I think, that combines Boudou, his question from South Sudan, but also others about how does the handbook and the assessment work that's done in education emergency settings, and how do you dovetail that with national assessment systems? And is it not better to basically have an approach also whereby you have one single assessment framework and a single measurement whereby crisis affected populations are included, vis-a-vis one measurement for crisis affected populations and one not? I think maybe Gente, is there something that you have any reflections on from your Iraqi context, that how does the government look at integration of the refugees or the internally displaced because of the ISIS violence, or and how do you go about that?
Yes.
And then Rachel, maybe from your perspective as well again, after Gente.
I think, at least from our experience, and I believe is similar to other countries, the tools we used are applicable very well in both contexts. And we have used some of those tools before in emergency setting, like, for example, we used ACER to define the level of children where they should be placed and how much support they need after displacement or after conflict or indifference, or after a crisis. So we have been using some pieces before, which we also use them revised and adapted for the learning outcome measurements. I would say that is applicable to both, because as it was mentioned in the beginning, this is a guidance, is not, and Rachel technically can explain better, definitely, but this is a guidance, is not a step-by-step process that don't have flexibility. It has enough flexibility to adapt in the context. And I'm not continuing longer with this because technically maybe, Dr. Rachel, you want to continue?
Thanks so much, Gente. I think it's such an important question, and I think that there are no easy answers. And one of the reasons why we developed this handbook is because every context, every emergency context is so different, and what is possible is so different. So in the 6 countries that we worked in, our first question was, is there a national assessment that can be used or that can be extended out to this population group? But there's also much more complex questions than that around, is it politically possible to do that? And in some situations it's not. Is it desirable to do that? You know, is the language of instruction in the camps the same as the language of instruction that's aligned to that national system? And really it depends on the alignment of the emergency within the country itself, what's possible and what's not possible. I think 2 examples, Burkina Faso already mentioned earlier, where we worked with government. We worked with them to add CEL to the assessments that they already did in the country, and then extended out from the national assessment with the same assessments. Ethiopia, we worked with the government to use similar tools and similar assessment methods that assess similar things, and to benchmark similarly as to how they do, so that you can compare the percentage of children who are at specific levels of proficiency in the emergency setting with those that aren't, where not necessarily that that's the purpose of the assessment, but where there's that coherence there. But that also comes with trade-offs. So if you know, and sometimes those trade-offs might be worth it, often they might be worth it, but it will come with the trade-off that whatever it is that you're doing in the emergency setting will have whatever limitations what is being done in the national setting is doing in terms of their measurement. So those things need to be thought about in advance and not developed later. I think the other example is that in some situations, this program impacted back onto the national system. So I recall after doing that difficult benchmarking process in Iraq that Gente spoke about earlier, that it was quite clear that government became interested in, they realized we don't actually know what we expect of children at different grades. Why don't we know that? Like, we don't have a document that we can go to and say, what do we expect of grade 4s? What should they be able to do in maths and reading? What do we think that their self skills should be? So it provided an opportunity to make connections between the system and this program. We always tried to align as much as possible while thinking through trade-offs. But we all know that this integration into country systems is a broader issue within the education and emergency sectors. Thank you.
All right, thank you both for that, those remarks. We have a lot of questions, and I realize we go over them one by one, but there's one, Dueke, I also want to ask you, and I think eventually it goes also back to Rachel, but it's about social emotional learning, and the question is if the handbook, and I guess for you, Dueke, also in general in the portfolio that you fund, do you recommend any tools or frameworks for measuring social emotional learning practically on the ground in different contexts? And this is Usha who's asking this question.
Thanks for this question. I think what's most important is to really look at, the local context, and also to see like what social emotional learning constructs are prioritized on a local level, and then to really look at, are there already measurement tools available that could be adapted? I think an important library that you could look at is also the measurement library that you can access through the website of EIEPC, which also kind of provides guidance on, how to select the right measure, like let's say holistic measure, and also how do you kind of adapt existing measures. So I would say no, do not recommend one specific measure, but really look at what's contextually relevant.
Right, great, Dueke. Rachel, maybe on that same vein, could you explain a little bit how we psychometrically validated social emotional learning items? And I think there is a related question also here on what domains were particularly difficult to measure in your experience.
Ooh, so many good questions. I think firstly, just to say on tools that we feel very similarly that we don't promote specific tools at Oxford Measured. It's about, what's the job you're trying to do, and then what's the right tool to do that job, exactly like when you decide to do your gardening. So that's why it's really important to go through those steps. What is it that you're trying to achieve? What's your target age group? What are your domains? And then based on all of those questions, you say, what is out there that could help us in this process? In terms of the validation process, it's a multi-step process that we recommend. And we really, both in our work with ECW on this program, but also noticed in the comments also a mention of the Schools 2030 work that, of course, ECW is also a donor for, and Porticus. We focus quite a lot on iteration between the kind of global expertise and the context and relevance on the ground. So we understand that for an assessment to be valid, it needs to be contextually located, it needs to be relevant, it needs to reflect the lived experiences of the children in that setting. And of course, for those of us who work in assessment, we know about the very long histories and traditions of children facing assessment items that have foreign concepts to them. And that can happen within countries and across countries. So we use iteration between that global expertise, if they do not have the contextual knowledge as well, if they're from a different context, with the local partners and national partners who do have that expertise. And we go through several steps around, as was mentioned earlier, how to select the right domains, what are the priorities in the area, how do those domains actually manifest within this setting? How do they will manifest differently across different settings. This is particularly important for CEL, and it's really important to make sure that you're capturing what that thing looks like in that setting. We have phase validity steps where all partners look at the items, all assessment partners look at the items and say, on the face of it, does it look like it's assessing the thing that it's meant to be assessing? And the global partners looking at that from a technical perspective, and the national partners and local partners are looking at that from a contextual perspective. Is a child in this context likely to interpret this item in the way that it was designed to be interpreted? We do piloting, and within that piloting, we have qualitative and quantitative analysis of the data. So we're looking at qualitative discussions with teachers and students about how they experienced the assessment, sometimes using things like think aloud protocols. And also we use psychometric analysis, which Moritz mentioned before, where we take kind of more established assessment methodologies to identify items that are better or worse at discriminating between children who have more or less knowledge in particular areas. But overall, we want to make sure that the combination of items represents the scope and the balance of the things that we're trying to measure. It's no good to have a test that has 20 amazing items that are performing amazingly in a psychometric test if those items collectively don't represent the thing that you're trying to measure. What domains are particularly difficult? So many of them. I think that if we move a little bit broader than CEL and look more holistic, things like teamwork and collaboration, quite difficult to assess, because you don't want to just assess people's knowledge of skills of teamwork and collaboration. You want to actually assess their ability to engage in teamwork and collaboration. So those types of measurements, I would think, are probably the hardest. I think that we've got quite good at measuring some of the other things that used to be quite difficult around empathy, self-concept. Thank you.
All right, great. I have a couple of questions in the chat which are more process related and that are more like forward-looking, like what are we going to do now with this handbook? Are we going to iteratively kind of in the future trying to improve it as well? And I think the two things I can say, we are considering translating the handbook in French and Arabic, being the two other countries where the ECW portfolio seems to be most active. I'd love to hear from you if you think that is helpful in the chat. I think the second thing I would like to say, and this is something I will discuss also with my colleagues in ECW, is how we can create a feedback loop, or how we can receive feedback from the experiences that you have in using this handbook. I think we would love to hear from you. If you've downloaded it, if you're trying to use it, how do you experience it, and what can we improve? And I think maybe also a way to reach out for support. I think we can always have a discussion about that, but in fact, we would like to see the application and the use of this handbook. So I think this is something that we will get back to you after this session on how to do that. Sanja, I hand it hereby back to you for closing and any other remarks you might have from here forward.
Thank you so much, Moritz, and thank you to all of our presenters. It's really exciting to see so many participants and so much active engagement, especially around a topic such as measurement, which I think we're all quite excited about, but some might consider slightly dry. I think at one point I saw over 200 attendees, which is just really thrilling. So thank you for joining us today and engaging so actively. As we've noted, the presentations, the recording of this webinar will be made available on the INE website, not instantaneously, but in the coming days. So you can surely check back there on the event page. And if you have questions, please feel free to follow up with us, the contact information on the events page, and we can direct you accordingly to get your question answered. But yeah, just a huge thanks to our presenters, to partners joining this webinar, ECW, for creating this fantastic handbook, and to all of our attendees for attending and engaging. Hope you all have a nice rest of your day, afternoon, evening. Any final word from our presenters? Okay, fantastic. We'll wrap up there. Thank you all so much. Take care.